Central Texas Life with Ann Harder.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Central Texas Life. Today we're going to talk about books. We're going to talk about books in Texas schools. It is a very hot topic right now as the State House is talking about a bill, House Bill 900, that was introduced by a Frisco Republican, Jared Patterson. Is that right? Yeah. And I have with me Denise Ballou, local from Central Texas, and via Zoom we have Kristen Bentley, who is in East Texas, not too far from Tyler, I understand, about 20 minutes. Okay, so I've done some reading on this and kind of understand a little bit about what the issue is. I do know that this is a movement across many, many states in the United States of really people wanting to have a little more, I don't know if it's say or understanding about materials that are in the school libraries. Some of it is being deemed not appropriate for kids. Correct. So that said, let's first talk about you ladies. I want to start with Kristen, since you're further away. Well, how did you get involved in this topic, and what is it exactly? Are you a paid lobbyist? I mean, I'll ask that off the bat. Or, how did you get involved in this particular issue?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have two sons, and my oldest son attends the local public high school. And I got involved in auditing his school library about a year and a half ago. And I was shocked because I found almost 300 books that were indecent, sexually explicit, pervasively vulgar, however you want to describe that, but definitely what I would call educationally unsuitable. I'm a former teacher. I'm a special education advocate. I have a master's degree in special education. But I tell you what, it was the mom radar in me that was set off, because you don't have to have a master's degree to understand and know that the materials that we're finding in Texas schools across the state in every single House district is inappropriate and unsuitable for children. And so at that time, we were very effective in the local area here in Tyler ISD. But what I've learned since then is that we are an exception, because we were able to get almost all of the books removed, almost 300 of them, whereas in other parts of the state, in most parts of the state, they are not being removed. And so aside from, being a mom, I also serve on the executive board of the Republican Party of Texas. I was elected to that position in June of last year, and I represent 19 counties in Northeast Texas. And so I'm the SREC from Senate District 1. I serve on the Legislative Priorities Committee, and I was tasked with chairing the subcommittee for the priority Stop Sexualizing Texas Kids, which is something that I'm so honored to do. And so the work that I did locally, we're still doing all over the Senate district, but now we're in legislative session, in our 88th session, and so we're taking it to the state level.
Denise, what about you? How did you get involved in this issue?
I'm an active member of McLennan County Republican Women, and I was voted to be a delegate for the state convention of Texas last year. So I've been really active in all areas. But this was one of the legislative priorities that got voted on at convention. And I have grandchildren. I have 5 grandchildren. And it pricked my heart as well, because we had a local committee through our Republican women tackle the library books. And we have a committee. There's several of us on the committee. We've been auditing books all over Texas, not just locally. And as Kristen said, these books are throughout the state of Texas. As an example, in Hereford, Texas, which is a very small town of 15,000, we found 165 books, sexually explicit books, in their small little district. And these books are not, I don't think people realize the extent that these books contain sexual acts in picture, in description, both heterosexual and homosexual. There's no, there's no boundary for what you find. And so it's very, very disturbing, and that's what drives us.
So how do you counter, oh, you're just book banners and you hate people that are different than you, and how do you respond to those, that you want to censor?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Kristen, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. The opposition has a lot of straw man arguments, and so we've been able to counter each one of them with facts. The fact of the matter is, number one, we are not targeting LGBT communities. As Denise said, these books that are sexually explicit, they may have heterosexual sex or homosexual sex. We don't care. We want sexually explicit books out of school libraries because they aren't developmentally appropriate for children. Sexualizing children is abuse. It's abuse. It's a form of abuse. And so we want book boundaries. It's not book banning. The government is not banning books. We are creating boundaries. That we have a long history in our country of regulating speech. Obscenity is illegal. It is not protected speech. These books don't meet the standard of obscenity because that definition is very hard to meet. We have to consider the books as a whole, the theme as a whole. And so they don't quite meet the standard of harmful materials because of that definition. However, what we know is that on our airwaves, the FCC regulates speech that goes beyond the standard of our penal codes. And between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., the FCC regulates for indecent and profane content. Why do they do that? To protect children.
Yeah.
The FCC has long recognized that we have to protect children from material that goes, that may not meet the strict standard of obscenity, which is never legal, which they regulate 24 hours a day on airwaves. And we have to go further than that and regulate for indecent and profane content. We have a long history of doing that. It's been challenged in our courts and it's always been upheld. So we are not banning books. We're regulating harmful content, indecent and profane content, because we know that children are harmed by that. They're not ready for these explicit materials.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that because we know there's just a huge problem with sex trafficking, with kids getting sucked into that kind of lifestyle, and I think you could make a case that as kids are become less sensitized to sexual content and they're exposed to more of that kind of material, that in essence it's a form of grooming.
It sure is. Yeah, it sure is. I think what's interesting, we have with the internet, there's all kinds of things that children have access to on the internet that we didn't have access to when we were growing up. And we do have bills addressing online pornography this session, that we want to have age verification for porn, which Louisiana just adopted in January. That just took effect. So, but what we're seeing is that children are desensitized when they are seeing this kind of content. The whole point of grooming is to desensitize children and to make them easier targets of abuse. That's what sexual grooming is. And it's just, there's so many different ways that predators will groom children, but using materials that are pornographic in nature inappropriate, sexually explicit, that's a way for them to break down those boundaries and cross boundaries so that they become easier targets and victims.
I suspect that there are people like me. My kids long out of school. I do have grandchildren, and like you say, Denise, I mean, your heart breaks that for a lot of these kids, their innocence is being taken away from them. Maybe at an age where they're just not equipped emotionally to deal with these kind of things. Were you surprised at some of the materials you came across? I mean, I think they're probably like, well, how bad could it be?
Yeah.
It's pretty bad, I think.
Absolutely. I was an educator for 23 years. I was not a certified teacher. I was a assistant, a paraprofessional. I worked in all areas of education. I even worked in the high school library locally at one of the high schools, and I had no idea. A lot of times these books are very deceiving. They look very innocent on the outside, but they're just filth on the inside. And just the fact of, this that age appropriateness is always discussed. But I'm sorry, even a high school senior has no business looking at this kind of stuff in a school library. Schools are to protect children, and it's purposely, I feel like, being put in their faces, whether it's, a fault of the librarian or not. Maybe the librarians aren't even aware of some of the contents of these books.
Hi, this is Sarah.
And I'm Carter.
And this is Some of Our Thoughts.
We're two Southern sommeliers, and we want to share everything we love and know about wine. We started hanging out during quarantine and cooking and drinking and listening to music, and we just thought this would be a great way to bring everything we know to you guys.
We will make wine knowledge and food pairings easy and approachable. So put on your favorite vinyl, grab your favorite glass of wine, tune into our show, and let's have some fun.
Wine and vinyl. So check us out on roguemedianetwork.com or wherever you get your favorite podcast. We'll be talking about a lot.
Hey y'all, I'm April,
Hi, I'm Caroline.
and we have a new podcast for you. What's it called, Caroline?
Bloody Happy Hour.
It's going to be your new favorite guilty pleasure. We're going to talk about some bloody stuff. Serial killers, true crime,
Rape.
rapists. Why not join us? We'll have a good time.
You literally never know. I don't know what I'm going to say. Bloody Happy Hour. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bros and heroes. Gonna tell you about bros and heroes. Gonna tell you about.
Hey, I'm Zach,
And I'm Mike.
and we have a fantastic new podcast to tell you about. Bros, Foes, and Heroes. It's the two of us looking into the world of comics, breaking down some characters that you may have never heard of, and some that are just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so Zach comes up with a character each time, and I go into it just completely blind. I don't know who this person is or what their abilities are or anything, and basically I guess we kind of go over their origin story and just some of the ridiculous stuff that maybe, especially Golden Age stuff.
Oh, Golden Age stuff is always the best, and we will make sure to highlight all of the shenanigans and just absolute weirdness of everything.
Yeah, that's right. So subscribe today and follow us on Instagram at Bros, Foes, Heroes.
And if you don't, I know where you live. Not really, but please subscribe.
Bros and foes and heroes. Gonna tell you about bros and foes and heroes.
Well, let's talk about the intent then of Representative Patterson's bill, and from what I understand, it is to provide a rating for books. It's not necessarily to remove them or to ban them or what's being said about it, but it's just to give parents an idea that, this list of books has got stuff in it. You may want to take a look at that before you have your third grader read it.
Yeah. Personally, the auditing that we have found, we don't find as much on the elementary level, but the middle school and the high schools are just infiltrated with these books. This book holds the vendors responsible.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to let Kristen take it from here because she's very well versed on all of this, much better than I am.
Well, I know Denise was there to offer excellent testimony on Tuesday, and but she's exactly right when we say the enforcement mechanism is through the vendors. And the vendors, what this bill does, HB 900, is it requires that vendors label books that they're selling to Texas schools if they are sexually explicit or if they have what they call sexually relevant material. Now, it does go further than that, though. It actually prohibits the sale of sexually explicit materials, and it creates a standard for school libraries. We don't have existing state standards for our libraries. We have guidelines only. And so this bill actually puts into Texas law that we have standards when it comes to the collection development of libraries or school libraries. And it was very interesting actually to hear the Texas Library Association supports that. They support standards for our school libraries for collection and development and would actually like to see standards go even further than that. So the standard, and one of the reasons that the Republican Party of Texas strongly supports this bill and why parents and grandparents are rallying behind it, who have been working on this issue to remove books for the last year and a half, is that it creates that very, very, very specific standard that Texas school libraries cannot have sexually explicit materials in their libraries. Immediately, vendors will be required to label these books, and any book that's labeled sexually explicit, they cannot sell to libraries, but they also have to issue a recall for any of the books previously sold to Texas schools that have been labeled sexually explicit.
I suspicion parents, because you say you got involved in this a year and a half ago. This is my pet theory that when COVID happened, suddenly parents were a lot more attuned to what their kids were learning because they suddenly became homeschoolers. And I don't know, maybe I'm totally wrong, but it seems like, and it was about then, parents were going to school board meetings en masse, and they were saying, no, wait a minute, there's stuff going on. And, there have been situations where those parents have been labeled as terrorists, and that kind of thing. So the question is, when you became involved in this issue, was it, what raised your conscience level to what was going on and this material that was in the schools?
Well, it's so funny because you're exactly right that, that COVID had some blessings in disguise, and that when parents' eyes were opened across the country to what was happening in schools through the online learning. Now, for me, I was already very politically involved, and so what caught my attention were there were some Texas moms out in Keller, and they were there to testify on HB 900 as well, that found a book called Genderqueer in Keller ISD. Genderqueer it's a graphic novel that depicts sexually explicit acts in drawings, and literally has strap-on dildos on young people that look underage, although I think they're represented in their 20s. Oral sex, it promotes watching pornography. It promotes using vibrators as a child. I mean, these are books that are recommended reading for children by given awards by the Texas Library Association, the American Library Association. So the Texas moms up in Keller were the first ones, I think, to find genderqueer in their school library. And so that brought a lot of attention to the issue in Texas back in October of 21, I believe it was. So, and what got me involved was I got a call from another SREC member who asked me if I could look into the library books in my son's district. And I will never forget it because I was on my way up to Arkansas to celebrate my anniversary, and I got off the phone with her, and I told her that I'd be more than happy to look at them when I got back. But I remember telling my husband, there's no way I'm going to find these books in our library. I live in the most Christian, the most conservative region of our state. There's just no way. And when I got home, sure enough, I started looking, and I was shocked. I was angry. I mean, I was not a nice lady for a few weeks to just about anybody because I was so disturbed by what I found in my son's school library.
Of course,
so,
Denise.
And that's what got me involved.
Right. I think that partly, as you say, the standards aren't defined, and as a broadcaster, we have certain standards that we adhere to. And I remember many years ago, there was a big story. It was a big kerfuffle because a local group was wanting to put a pamphlet, a small booklet. I can't remember if it was through the Girl Scouts or what it was. I just remember the booklet we could not have put descriptions or depictions or anything on the air.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
And so it's kind of like, if it's not appropriate for on the air, could it possibly be appropriate for kids?
Absolutely. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And even talking about this now, I realize, I probably have to be careful even describing what's in these books. But, you brought up I think Denise might have brought this up earlier, that it's unimaginable for reasonable adults what is in these books. I mean, explicit means nothing is left for the imagination. And so that's what you need to understand, what everybody needs to understand. Parents and grandparents need to understand that these books leave nothing for the imagination with regard to sex acts and all kinds of sex acts.
In fact, just today, in preparation for this discussion, I was listening to a talk show, and they were talking about this very thing because you have, as you say, just been in Austin not too long ago, testifying. And, of course, at this point, the House has heard testimony.
Correct.
Have they tabled it in the committee, or what's the status of the bill?
Last I heard, they were deliberating for about up to a week. And my understanding is next it goes over to the Senate, and
it all kind of starts over there.
It starts over from my understanding of it.
So will you be going back to
absolutely
testify? And I think you told me that it was late in the night before you even because there were so many, and obviously it's an issue that people are passionate about on both sides.
Exactly. Yeah, there were a number of bills that the Public Education Committee on the House side were listening to. They moved House Bill 900 to the last for the day because they knew there were over 80 up to 100 witnesses that wanted to testify. And I would say the majority of those that testified were in favor of the bill. Concerned parents, grandparents, and we felt like we had a lot of support from those that are on the committee as well, which was really a wonderful thing to see because you really don't know. We're Texas, but we have our own issues, and we're not just a state of conservatives. We have both sides of the fence, and I felt like we had a little bit of almost argument with a couple of the board members on the Public Education Committee, where we were, especially with Jared Patterson, his bill, he was reading and explaining it, and they were really grilling him on a lot of specifics, and even brought the Bible into it.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories of the Bible, which are
right.
obscene, and that really got a lot of us our dad.
Well, you know, and then you hear when you start talking about book banning, you know, the Gone with the Wind banned because of some words in it, and you know, Huckleberry Finn and some of the classics that you know people grew up on that are not you know politically correct anymore. So you just pull them out of the library, don't allow a child to read it. And then there's another point that was brought up that maybe a book like a Stephen King novel that might have sex scenes in it, should that also be rated? Should that be something that, would that fall under this bill, or is it just books that deal with sex?
My understanding is more the sex, but I could be wrong. Kristen?
Well, I think what we want to see is the intent of the bill is, you know, if it can't be read aloud during the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m.
Yeah.
because it's indecent and profane, then it shouldn't be in a school library. Our children, Texas children, should be safer in their school libraries than they are tuning into television and radio. Shouldn't they? And so if it is a Stephen King novel that goes into explicit detail about a sex scene, or about sex, or if it's pervasively vulgar, which would mean that you know, there's an excessive amount of profanity, then we need to evaluate that. If it can't be read during those hours, you know, on American airwaves, public airwaves, then our children shouldn't have access to it in their school libraries. So we want to make sure that we are protecting you know, classics. We want to make sure that that we are being very conservative when it comes to protecting speech. And so I don't mind the debate over the right language, but the Bible is not sexually explicit. And that's the argument that Representative Tallarico was trying to make, is that the Bible is sexually explicit. It is absolutely not sexually explicit. And we know that the Bible, every passage in the Bible can be read over the radio or broadcasted on television. And while there might be some classics that have some profanity in them or reference to sex, it might give them a label of, you know, sexually relevant materials, which would require parental permission. But I would say that most classic novels, they're not pervasively vulgar, they're not explicit. And so I don't think any of the books that we're familiar with would be removed from school libraries in Texas.
And this bill is just dealing with school libraries. You can go to your local public library, presumably, and unless community standards are such that the community says, no, this isn't appropriate. If that parent wants their child to read these different books that are in question, they should be able to find them somewhere, right?
Yeah, and that was the point that I think Representative Harrison kept making in his examination of witnesses. There were several witnesses in the opposition, and I do have to say that Denise is right, that the people who testified overwhelmingly were in support of the bill, but the ones who were against it, they really used a lot of the same straw man arguments that we were going after LGBT books and characters and ideas and things like that. But even the ones who felt there should be no restriction on, you know, really like pornography in the library, I thought Representative Harrison did a great job grilling them and saying that if you want your child to have that, what's stopping you? What is the state doing that would stop you from providing that for your child? Because really, essentially, the state's not stopping anyone from going and buying these books for themselves. But the argument that the state has to provide them for children with tax dollars, and that was the one that he was making that point over and over again, that the state doesn't, the state has a compelling interest to protect kids essentially from sexualization, but they certainly aren't stopping anyone from, a parent from providing these. They can go buy them at Barnes and Noble if they're that, bent on their children having them.
Well, this is a legislative priority for Governor Abbott, I understand. And so presumably sometime before the session's over in May, there'll be some sort of a vote about it.
We hope so, and we're really praying hard about that too as well. Yeah. I do want to say as well, our local school district where I'm a taxpayer, this is where we started on the local level. We found 45, actually more than that, but we held it to 45 books that were sexually inexplicit. To the administrators first. We were put off to go in front of the school board because they wanted to investigate on their own. And so we did that. We took it to the school board, and they agreed to do book audits on the campuses. And out of 45 books, they removed 9.
Really?
Yes. The majority of those books are still on the shelves, and that's just inexcusable. And it makes me so angry. I raised my children in this district. My husband and I taught at this district, and this district standards used to be much higher than they are now. And as a taxpayer, I don't want my taxpayer money going to filth. And it almost makes me to where I just want to move out of the district because I'm so upset with it. We do have some board members that have reached out to me and to our committee, which are very supportive. And I feel like it's going to get a second look. So I'm thankful that we have some really good, moral, conservative men on our school board in that particular district. It's an ongoing fight.
Well, what I find interesting about talking to the two of you is that, you're not politicians. You're parents first, and saw an issue and are concerned about it and have really dug in to try to make some changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I would say too, what's really important about grassroots activism is that when we come together and we're organized, and we are organized, let me tell you, parents and grandparents in the state are very organized on this issue. And that was very clear at our first committee hearing on just one bill that the RPT supports on this issue. We are able to then inform and educate and influence our representatives because they're so busy with so many different issues that they really rely on us to educate them on these things. And I'll tell you, I had a great conversation with one of our representatives that serves on public education. And what he told me is that we've been educating them and giving them examples of the books, but what he said is it wasn't until the questioning of certain people who serve as a superintendent, for instance, that he did not understand the sheer disregard that these people have for the welfare of children. And it speaks to what Denise said, that they brought this to the attention of the school board there in your community, and they only removed 9 of them. And there are other districts across the state that will not even remove books like Genderqueer. In El Paso, Texas, back in December, they voted 8-1 to keep Genderqueer, which has pornographic images in it, that, tells kids to go look at porn online, which is very unhealthy. We know the risks of that to children. They couldn't even remove that. So the sheer disregard that these people across Texas who are tasked with overseeing the welfare of children in our schools have no regard for their welfare. And that was very disturbing to this representative.
Do you think that, I'm just trying to figure it out. I mean, to me, it shouldn't be a political issue, one side or that. I mean, decent people ought to be in agreement no matter what, which party you vote for. So that's just me. But I'm just, I look at this and I'm trying to think, do some people view children as little adults? That they're automatically equipped to handle things that adult brains come without coming to grips with the fact that they're developing, that these brains are developing, and some of these images can leave lasting negative effects on kids.
Well, we have to realize that there are people who believe that children are sexual beings from the time they are born. And that is based on Alfred Kinsey's flawed research. He was a pedophile, a known predator. And he, in his research, he abused children. And so, but there are people like him in academia who believe that children are sexual from the time of birth and they have sexual rights, and that we as parents and grandparents who stand to protect them are standing in, that we're actual oppressors because they have a right to be sexual. And so we have to understand that there are people who exist in every field, in professional fields, who believe that fundamentally. And so on the other hand, there are other people who are just misguided. But I will tell you what, we know that protecting kids from explicit materials in their schools has overwhelming support. It has we have polled it. And we know that parents support this, that most reasonable people support this. And this bill, it actually has bipartisan support.
That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm very relieved to hear that. I think that's great. I did find this little factoid. True or not, I don't know. It's from PEN America, a nonprofit. It says that advocates for free speech, that Texas had removed more books from school libraries than any other state, about 800 books. But that could mean everything. That could mean Gone with the Wind. It could be a lot of books that you go, okay. But there are many more that are in question.
Oh, there's a list of over 900.
So where can you go to find out what's in schools?
Well, we started with a list, TexansWakeUp.com, and it's a great resource. Now, it's shows about 125 books. You can scroll through there. You can look at them. You can click and look at the description. These books are rated on BookLooks, is another good website you can look at. BookLooks, I think it's .com or .org. Mm-hmm. It's an excellent resource as well to see what's in these books. But there are over 900 books on list if you had the time to look through. These audits take a lot of time to look through. So we use Texans Wake Up because it's about 125, and most of these books are in the districts. I mean, hands down. We can't find a district, even locally, even some of our smaller schools in the area, that don't have these books. Mm-hmm. So it's time for parents to stand up.
Well, just to become educated.
Absolutely.
As to what's going on, and then make that decision for your child. If your child, then
exactly
knock yourself out.
Right. Exactly.
Buying whatever you want to buy for them. But yeah, for the protection of kids. Anyway, my hats off to the two of you for the work that you're doing, and we'll just continue to monitor this bill and see what happens in the coming weeks. As far as having some sort of a rating and holding these book vendors responsible for the content that they're wanting to sell to Texas schools.
Absolutely. It's a great start.
Yeah, well, many thanks to Kristen Bentley and also Denise Ballou. Thank you both for being with
having
us.
us on and for helping us spread the word.
All right. Well, we'll join you next time. I hope you'll join us next time for Central Texas Life. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Central Texas Life with Ann Harder is part of the Rogue Media family. Be sure to check out our other shows at roguemedianetwork.com. Please rate this show 5 stars on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Join us again soon for more Central Texas Life with Ann Harder.